the Chinese have been crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait in their airplanes and also in their ships. And these are deliberate actions in trying to destroy the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. And therefore, we are alarmed. And it's not just Taiwan is alarmed. There are many other like-minded partners of Taiwan, like Japan, the United States, Australia, and some European countries, Canada, and etc. They're also very alarmed. And therefore, in their public statements, they always comment on the peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait as being very important, and they oppose unilateral change of status quo. So the situation is getting worse, and we need to prepare for the worst possible scenario.
And does that worst possible scenario now feel more likely?
Yes, indeed. If you look at the trajectory of the Chinese military threat against Taiwan, it is more likely. But I'm not going to pinpoint at one point or at 1 year that China is going to launch a war against Taiwan. For the Chinese who follow the traditional Sun Tzu military philosophy, I think their objective right now might try to coerce Taiwan, try to take Taiwan in without using military force. That might be their objective right now. But there might also be a point where they might want to use military force. But no matter what, Taiwan needs to be prepared. And we can anticipate that the Chinese military pressure is going to increase over Taiwan. And therefore, we need to speed up our preparation. And the president has already announced a series of military reform, including the extension of the conscript. And that is one way to show that we are determined and we try to get prepared.
Yeah, I mean, military figures in America, not least the head of the Navy, has said that actually an invasion as early as this year is possible. Do you think that's credible as a piece of intelligence?
Well, there are all kinds of predictions. You know, some will predict that it will happen this year, and more will predict that it will happen next year because Taiwan is running for presidential election, and the United States will also run for its presidential election. But somebody says that 2020 is more likely. Somebody says 2035, and etc. To me, 2027 is a year that we need to watch out. It's not because of Taiwan or the United States or other countries, but because of the situation, the domestic power situation in China. In 2027, Xi Jinping is likely to go into his fourth term. And if in his previous 3 terms, he cannot claim any achievement during his office, he might need to think about something else for him to claim as his achievement or his legacy. If you look at the Chinese situation right now, the economy is going down, the people are not happy, the real estate business seems to be melting down, the international community are not happy with what China has been doing, and therefore there's nothing for him to claim as his legacy at this moment. So we are concerned that in 2027, if Xi Jinping cannot change the situation domestically in China, he might want to resort to a use of force or creating crisis externally to divert domestic attention or to show to the Chinese that he has accomplished something. And we are concerned that Taiwan might become his scapegoat.
Yeah, I mean, 2022 really, the dial was moved, wasn't it, in terms of those military jets flying towards Taiwanese airspace. You know, it is now every day they're crossing the median line every day. You could argue the status quo has changed.
Yes.
They've made that an everyday thing now. What purpose do you think that serves for them? Why do you think they're doing that? Is it just intimidation? Is it part of an early move to escalate? Why do you think they are doing that?
There's several reasons for China to do that. One is for diplomatic purpose. They want to scare away those supporters coming to support Taiwan. They use the pretext of Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan to launch that large-scale military exercises to Taiwan. And they want to make their threat credible. And they want to use that to prevent other countries from showing support to Taiwan. And the second is for military purposes. If they can come closer toward Taiwan, like cross the median line of the Taiwan Strait and come close to the 24 nautical mile zone, I think they can suppress Taiwan's reaction time. And if in the future they want to launch a military attack against Taiwan, the response time from Taiwan is going to be very shortened. So it has a military purpose as well. And of course, the most important will be psychological. For the Taiwanese people, when we see all these Chinese military aircrafts or ships coming close to Taiwan, it is very threatening. And the Chinese want to threaten Taiwan into submission. So they want to conquer Taiwan without using military force to attack Taiwan. So these are possible motivations from the Chinese side in the, conducting military exercises.
There was, you bring up the Pelosi visit. There must have been, it was a very perilous moment in August, and it felt like it really had the potential to escalate. Were there moments then that you and your colleagues in government thought, wow, this is it, this is where it begins, it's really going to escalate into something very serious now?
We understood that it was going to escalate. But we did not
think it was going to escalate into
We did not think that it would escalate into a conflict. But there were still things that we need to be aware of. If it's an escalation, the two sides will move up the stairs. And the escalation might come to a point where military clash becomes inevitable. And we understand our responsibility, even though we have the commitment to defend ourselves. But at the same time, we don't want to see the war happening. And therefore, we took a very responsible steps in preventing the crisis to escalate into a major crisis. That's our view at the time. And we work with the United States and other countries to show that even though we are very confident in defending ourselves, but at the same time, we are showing our responsibility.
But it must have been very obvious to you that one misstep and things could have really spiraled out of control and in a situation where you couldn't control it anymore. Yes.
In history, if you study war, many wars happen inadvertently. And therefore, the war can happen like an accident. And if you look at the very frequent Chinese military activities surrounding Taiwan, or the Chinese military activities in East China Sea and South China Sea, very often you see that some of tiny little accident might spark into a major war.
And are you worried that that could happen?
We worry that might happen. Look at the close proximity of the Chinese airplanes and our airplanes. And if they cross the 24 nautical mile zone, some of our weapon systems might have to target those Chinese aircrafts, and that might spark an accident, even though it might not be intentional for the Chinese pilots to cross the 24 nautical mile zone. And if you look at the South China Sea, the Chinese airplanes sometimes will come in very close to the patrolling airplanes by the United States, by Australia, Canada, and etc. And sometimes they are so close as 10 feet away. And sometimes they will fly flares to scare away the patrol boat. And these are all very dangerous and provocative actions. And they might spark accidental war.
And is there anything
that is nothing we want.
Yeah, is there anything you can do to prevent that at this stage?
The only thing to prevent that is, our self-restraint. We want to show our responsible way of handling this. But the second most effective way is for the international community to tell China that what they have been doing is intolerable. And for the international community, especially the like-minded democracies, to tell China that they need to look at the peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait as a very important matter. And they should also tell China that any unilateral change of status quo is not going to be accepted. And fortunately, we are seeing the fellow democracies beginning to say that to China. And if all democracies are committed to peace and stability over this area, I think China needs to think twice when they want to spark any accident.
There are some analysts who say that militarily, Taiwan is underprepared for a potential war with China. There are some saying that you don't have enough munitions, that defence spending as a proportion of GDP is not high enough, that there are not enough recruits into the army, that there's not enough focus on asymmetric warfare and all these things. And some say that actually Taiwan is significantly less prepared than Ukraine was, to offer a similar example. Is it a fair accusation that Taiwan is being complacent in the face of this threat?
There's always room for improvement, and we understand that, and we try to improve our preparedness and our capability to self-defense. We understand that in previous years, we might not have acquired sufficient ammunition, and in previous years, we might not have sufficient training for our military personnel. And in previous years, we understand that the number of our soldiers in defending Taiwan might not be enough. But look at the reform measures the president has announced. We try to buy more weapons from the United States. We want to produce more domestically. For your information, Taiwan's military industry is rather strong. And therefore, we want to use that advantage to produce a lot of weapons for our own purposes. And we also announced the extension of the conscripts from 4 months to 1 year. And we have also announced that we are going to toughen up the training process for the conscripts. And I think all these shows that Taiwan is trying to get prepared. And also one thing for you to know that we are working together with like-minded partners so that Taiwan's military personnel can be better prepared, can be better trained. And that kind of process is going on. And we are very happy with the trend right now.
Do you think it would be possible for Taiwan to withstand an invasion or a blockade from the PLA without direct intervention from the United States?
Our expression on this has been very consistent, is that defending Taiwan is our own responsibilities. And if we are not willing to defend ourselves, we have no right to ask any other country for help. And
would you be able to without that help?
We are determined to defend ourselves, and we will defend ourselves, and we will have the ability to defend ourselves. And look at the training and acquisition of munitions and etc. We have the confidence that we will be able to defend ourselves. Even though comparatively, a lot of countries are saying that Taiwan is so small, China is so big, and China is so powerful. Would Taiwan be able to withstand the onslaught of the Chinese aggression? I think the same comparison can be put on Ukraine, Russia. Ukraine is relatively weak, but Russia is one of the largest military in the world, and people anticipate that Ukraine will fall within a week or two. But they continue to fight on because they adopted the right strategy, and they show their morale and determination. By the same token, Taiwan will do the same thing. We will be able to defend ourselves.
Your government was elected on the basis of maintaining the status quo,
yes.
Not pushing for independence, not conceding to China. Is the status quo really just a temporary stopgap? Can the status quo really last forever?
It might not last forever, but the status quo can be maintained if both sides show respect to that status quo. And our policy is that status quo serves the best interest for all parties concerned, and therefore the policy of this government is going to continue this policy of safeguarding the status quo. But if the Chinese, especially their military, decides that they will have the power to upset the status quo, of course, the status quo is going to be very hard to maintain. And look at what China is trying to do right now. They're trying to upset the status quo and then create new normal. And it's going to be a lot of pressure, and it's going to be dangerous for all the countries in this region. And therefore, the international community should advise China, or should urge China, that they need to keep the status quo as well in order to maintain peace and stability in this area.
I mean, relations, as you said, have really deteriorated in the last year under your government. I mean, is there more that the government of Taiwan could do to talk to China to try and de-escalate the situation we're currently in?
We are trying, and if you listen very carefully to either the president or other senior government officials, we are open to talks with China. And if the Chinese are willing to talk to Taiwan, the door is always open. But we don't welcome political preconditions, of course. But the Chinese are making it very clear on their political preconditions They set the tone on January 2nd, 2019, in Xi Jinping's very famous statement. They say that we have to accept one China principle, we have to accept unification, we have to accept one country, two system model. After Hong Kong, do you still want us to accept one country, two system model? We are not out of our mind. And therefore, accepting those Chinese preconditions means that we are submitting to China. And that is something that the people here in Taiwan would never accept. But our door is open. If China wants to speak with Taiwan honestly to deal with the differences in between the two sides, we are open to that kind of suggestion. But setting political precondition is not acceptable.
Does that path, though, to de-escalation now feel pretty blocked off because of recent actions?
I would say that Taiwan will try not to escalate. Taiwan will not provoke. And Taiwan government will not give China any excuse to launch a war against Taiwan. And that is one of the most responsible ways that Taiwan can do in its policy. And we are doing it right now. And I think the responsibility is on the other side. You can see that China is flexing its military muscle on Taiwan, trying to prevent Taiwan from participating in international affairs, criticizing Taiwan in an undeserved manner. And it's being very provocative. And I think the international community should recommend to China that they should act like a responsible member of the international community.